We'll be starting again very shortly. This is a reminder that we are still under level 2. So I would ask you to have a think about whether you've brought any devices back into the hearing room. And if you have, please deposit them with security now. Thank you very much.
You all right over there?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, V13A, before the adjournment, we were talking about an SRG minute from a meeting on the 9th of March. And I was going to take you to the SAGE minutes, because there was a SAGE meeting on that day as well. But just before I do, there's a document I'd like to pull up, please. And in fact, I gave the reference to our document manager, so I can't recall. Yes, INQ 6194. And this is just to clarify something, some evidence that you gave this morning about the reasonable worst case scenario document. So this is an email. If we just scroll down, pardon me, so we can see the first email sent in the chain. So this is the email from Jenny Harries.
Have we got the whole of this now, Miss Potter? Because of course you have to read these things from the bottom up, don't you?
Yes, this document begins. I think that's the.
That's all of it.
That's the okay. Chain on this part.
All right.
But if we just look at the bottom section, please. So this is an email from Jenny Harries to the attendees at that meeting on the 7th of March. And she's responding, she says, joint work on Project 2 would be very much appreciated. Project 2 is that reasonable worst case scenario. And she says, I'll be chairing our Public Health England Strategic Response Group meeting at 9:30 today. That's on the 8th of March. And I intend to run through all the actions and ensure those for PHE are in progress. And then if we scroll up, please. And then we have a response to Jenny Harries copying in D84U and says, yes, thanks, I'll join the call. Could you let me have the dial-in details? So Jenny Harries is confirming that she'll accept the assistance of the Department of Health and Social Care to conduct the reasonable worst case scenario. D84U is included in that chain. D84U is the person to whom the reasonable worst case scenario was sent. But your evidence is that you never saw the document and you don't think it was provided to Public Health England. Is that right?
So, I mean, that email was that document was I think, identified as the first draft.
Yeah.
I don't know where it went in the Department of Health and Social Care and what happened to it subsequently, and I think you'd need to ask the Department of Health and Social Care.
Okay.
This is the 8th, what you've just been looking at is the 8th of March. It's a week before the document is prepared.
It was, yes, it was prior to the preparation of the document.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if we can go now to the Sage minutes of the 9th of March, the reference is 4837, page 3. So if we begin just by, yes, thank you, scrolling down just to the attendance at that meeting. So Chris Whitty, who would be chairing the meeting as the government chief scientific advisor, was there. H57C, who's we've heard from, Sir John Aston. Attendees from, well, the chief medical officer is there, and also Jonathan Van Tam, who's her deputy. D84U, Georgina Collins, but there's no one there from Public Health England. Can you help us with why that was?
I suspect it was as simple as availability to attend.
Okay. If we scroll up to page 1, paragraph 2, please. There's a discussion of the public health issues at this is the first SAGE meeting. And at paragraph 2, it says, it was agreed that there are currently 3 public health areas of risk that need to be addressed as initial priorities for police and others. And C is where the substance has been deliberately placed, but as yet undiscovered. I know you weren't in attendance at that meeting, but the evidence of Sally Davies, who was in attendance, is that this issue was envisaging where the poison might have been placed as part of the attack, and not a discussion about the discarded container.
That would be my understanding too.
Okay. If we scroll down to page 3, paragraph 19. So the public health advice, it says, the current public health advice was discussed that the risk to the public is low and all known sites have been secured. There is no need to provide further public health advice now with what we know at the moment, but this should be kept under review. Would you agree with me that it doesn't appear that there was any discussion about the discarded container at that meeting, the SAGE meeting on the 9th of March?
I don't know.
You weren't there.
I wasn't there,
Okay.
and these notes would suggest that it's a summary of the discussion rather than a verbatim recording of the discussion.
Okay. Would you agree with me that PHE ought to have had someone at that meeting to provide input to explain concerns around unidentified containers, which we know PHE was discussing earlier in the day?
Ms. Pottle, remind me of the evidence. Somebody, and it might have been Dame Sally Davies, said that for SAGE meetings, the chairman, who on this occasion I think was Professor Whitty,
Yes.
made his own mind up who he wanted to come. Have I misremembered that?
Well, the minutes from the strategic review group suggest that it was an action for PHE to ensure that people were at national meetings. And this witness's evidence is that she thinks it was about availability.
Well, if I've misremembered the evidence, that's fine. Just tell me.
Yes, I think Sir John,
Perhaps it was Sir John, was it?
yes, I think so. But I'm exploring with this witness whether she would agree with me that someone from Public Health England should have been there to provide input regarding concerns about unidentified containers.
Right.
So that there were public health professionals at that meeting,
Yes.
including the chair, Sir Jonathan Van Tam, and of course we had Chief Medical Officer. There's also documented evidence that they had met with Public Health England, I believe earlier in that day. So I think there was read across between different meetings where they would have had opportunities to discuss relevant topics. But I think, as other witnesses have identified, SAGE meetings are very much considering the science.
Yes, I see. The reason I ask you is because the SRG minutes from the 9th of March, and that meeting took place at 12:30 during the day, so just 3.5 hours before this meeting. At that meeting, it's recorded that PHE was moving towards relaying messages to the public around not picking up any unidentified containers. But when we move to the SAGE minutes some 3.5 hours later, it doesn't seem to be any discussion about that. And there's a review of the public health advice, but it doesn't seem to cover what for PHE seems to be quite a critical issue. Would you agree with me about that?
So PHE considered it at its strategic response group meeting. That does not mean that it acted on it. It was something to consider. Therefore, there needs to be further work to actually identify whether there is evidence to support that consideration, to actually inform any public health actions going forward. Just because something is considered does not mean it's acted on.
If we can move then to the 10th of March, the SRG minutes, that's the first meeting following the SAGE meeting. The inquiry reference is 4705, page 3. So these are minutes from the 10th of March. You were in attendance on that day. And on page 3, it's recorded, risk assessment unchanged. It was noted that the risk falls into two categories: acute risk, this is covered by the extent risk management, and chronic risk, which refers to long-term low-grade exposure. For example, people present in the restaurant. PHE advice is that this risk is extremely small, but is being considered. This will be part of the discussions and at Redacted, and we'll note what comes out of the meeting. There's nothing here to explain why the concerns on the 9th of March at the SRG meeting, why they weren't followed through. Would you agree with that?
There's nothing documented here. I have no evidence that it wasn't discussed by colleagues such as met the previous day, and decisions around proportionality are likely to have been made, but I do not have anything documented or any evidence to that fact.
Okay. If we turn then to the SAGE, which happened on the 12th of March, that was the next SAGE meeting in time. The inquiry reference is 004842, page 5. Yes, this is the list of attendees. You were present at this meeting along with Nick Gent, Sir John Aston. It was again chaired by Chris Whitty. If we can scroll up, please, to page 1. And if we scroll down, please, thank you. So that Sir John gives a situation update about the victim's car and the concerns around contamination in the vehicle. The discussions are also about low-level repeated exposure to organophosphates. We can see that at paragraph 3. There is a reference on page 4. If we could just scroll down, please. it says that PHE to continue to develop guidance in close conjunction with behavioral scientists to engage with the public appropriately. And I'm just wondering what discussions there were with behavioral scientists. Do you recall?
Which paragraph am I looking
Sorry, it's page 4. Yes, pardon me, just at the bottom there. The summary of actions.
Have you got the place all right?
Yes, thank you. PHE had behavioural scientists in its workforce, and also worked with behavioural scientists across government and academic colleagues. And the behavioural scientists in question have a lot of experience in working with people who have been exposed to, or I don't like the word victim, but victims of incidents or various other unforeseen events. And they provide advice working with our communications colleagues in how to frame messages to be effective
I see.
based on a lot of research evidence.
Okay. Well, you were at this meeting. Can you help us with what exactly the discussions with the behavioral scientists were to be about? What sort of message was being considered there?
I don't recall the fine details, but I do recall that there was a lot of concern around Salisbury because of the number of areas in the centre of the city cordoned off and the disruption to day-to-day life. And that there was, as I stated earlier, there was considerable engagement, community engagement at a local level by public health colleagues, both national colleagues, local colleagues, and local authority public health colleagues, as well as other partners supporting the police. And so I think it would have been around general information and advice and messaging, and there were a number of community meetings as well that took place.
I see. There was further advice, public advice given on the 13th of March by PHE. If we can just pull that up, please. It's 4738 is the reference, page 2. So the advice is that the CMO and PHE's advice remains that the risk to the general public is low following the incidents. And then if we, scroll down, it talks about advice given to the general public who are in the Mill Pub or Zizi's restaurant, that they could have only been exposed to small traces, if any, and drawing the distinction between them and the patients who fell so ill, which would be the Skripals. And then there's a discussion of precautionary advice for those that visited those locations, to wash clothes and clean belongings that they may have had with them. And then re-emphasizes that there's no further cases of illness have been reported since the incident occurred on the 4th of March. And we understand the public will be feeling unsure, but we are not seeing new cases of any members of the public being seriously ill. So that was the advice provided at that stage, a message of reassurance. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. The next piece of advice given is on the 23rd of March, which is on page 1 of this document. And it's, in effect, advice about clothes that could only be dry cleaned, that needed to be double bagged, and explains that those clothes could be collected by the council. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reference to that one, please.
It's the same document.
The same
So
document.
it's 4738.
Thank you.
That's page 1 of the document. I'm now V13A, going to take you to the SRG minutes from the 29th of March. We go to page 2. You were present at this meeting, I should say. We'll just wait for the document to be brought up. Yes, there we go. Under the situation update, it says MW, and that was Mike Wade, is that right? Has been informed at 15:45 today about a new cordoned area about 100 meters away from the house going over a children's play area. The police chief inspector has asked for a public health and reassurance presence in this neighborhood from today. The police are searching for any disposed chemical waste in this area. Can I just ask you, you were at this meeting, what was your understanding of the word disposed chemical waste?
Precisely what it says, disposed chemical waste. We didn't know what format any chemical waste might be in.
Okay. But the police were clearly concerned that this could be, they were searching for it in a children's play area. If we go over the page to page 3, and I'm looking at the first sort of large paragraph, halfway down. It says, National Counterterrorism Police have just broadcast the new cordon area in the media during the SRG meeting and have stated the previous Public Health England advice that has not been signed off following this new investigation activity. Any new actions in the investigation need to be communicated to PHE in order to produce accurate public health messaging. And then if we, at the very bottom of that page, for communication strategy, it says, following the recent media broadcast around the new cordon area and the police having released the previous PHE statement, the public health risk remains low. JH, that's Jenny Harries, will go back to DHSC after this meeting to clarify whether it was signed off by them on PHE's behalf. If not, to ask police to remove that line from their media release. Do you recall this, this meeting?
I don't recall it, but I've had visibility of these minutes.
I see. Because it sounds, I mean, perhaps this is usual in an incident, but it sounds a bit unusual that during the actual meeting itself, it was discovered that there was a broadcast about a new cordon area and that public health advice was being repeated that hadn't been updated. You don't recall that?
I mean, that's what these notes say, yes.
Okay.
Is this new cordon area the children's playground?
That was, I believe that's what was the area.
Okay.
But I think what it indicates is that PHE worked through as part of the multi-agency response rather than having a direct one-on-one relationship with that part of the police.
So reading between the lines, are you saying that there wasn't a direct line of communication with, with the National Counterterrorism Police, at least on this issue?
I think on this issue that it was missed. I mean, it may well have been a timing issue as much as anything.
Okay. We've seen from previous minutes that you were responsible for liaising with the police, along with Nick Gent. Were there any difficulties in obtaining information from them about their searches?
They did not share their search strategy with us.
Did they tell you about their hypothesis about a discarded container of Novichok? For instance, what it might look like, whether it would be plastic or glass, anything like that?
So Dr. Gent did discuss with them the possibility of there being something somewhere in some format I don't believe what format that might be was ever discussed.
Is there any record, as far as you're aware, of Dr. Gent's discussions about this?
I believe that he has recorded it, and I was aware of it at the time.
Okay. Are you talking now about Dr. Gent's letter to Sir John in the course of the public health review?
Yes.
Okay. We've seen that. This information, which was conveyed during the meeting, that the police were conducting searches away from the house over a children's play area, and that they were concerned about disposed chemical waste. Did that for you raise the issue of a public health risk from discarded material?
There was a potential risk, but that had been mitigated by the police themselves by cordoning off that area while they searched it.
Reading through these minutes, it seems that the immediate actions taken by Public Health England are to consider whether their statement that the advice given previously, whether that should be removed from police messaging. But there's nothing in these minutes that suggests that there is an urgent need to review a risk assessment. Would you agree with me?
Yes, and there is no evidence to suggest there was any new information to inform further risk assessment at this stage.
So you didn't regard the fact that the police were searching for disposed chemical waste in an area which included a children's play area, that was new evidence to inform a risk assessment?
It was new. It was the police search approach. It was police search rather than evidence that would inform a risk assessment. So to answer your question, no.
No, I see. I'd like to ask you now a bit more about information shared by the police. We touched on it just briefly. Commander Murphy has given evidence before this inquiry, and he's confirmed that information regarding the covert investigation, that's Operation Caterva, was not shared with Public Health England until after the Amesbury poisonings. And Operation Caterva was the covert investigation into the perpetrators, and it included the suspects' movements around Salisbury, including the discovery that there was 33 minutes where the suspects were in the Salisbury area and not on surveillance, and that the rucksack that they were carrying, presumably holding the Novichok, was transferred from one suspect to the other in that time. Do you think that had that information been shared with PHE, that this would have prompted PHE to give the advice that was contemplated on the 9th of March, which is messages to the public around not picking up any identified containers?
I think it would have had to be considered. I don't know.
We've already discussed the risk assessment, I think, in detail, and you've confirmed that there is no documented risk assessment prepared by PHE for the Salisbury or the Amesbury attacks. Is that right?
No. Dr. Gent prepared a risk assessment subsequent to the Amesbury incident, a documented one.
Yes, are you talking about the document that was sent to Sir John Aston by Nick Gent when he was asked to provide an assessment of the public health risk after being informed about the police covert investigation?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, we have seen that document. I should be more precise in my question. There's no documented risk assessment undertaken by PHE for the Salisbury poisonings. Nothing documented until that document by Nick Gent. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. Dame Sally Davies gave evidence to the inquiry, and her evidence was, we don't need to turn to it, but for the transcript, and sir, for your note, it's the transcript from the 11th of November, page 148. Her evidence was that it is helpful to have formal risk assessments, and she had worked on the assumption that one was made. In her view, it was PHE's role to conduct the risk assessment, and it should have been done. Do you agree?
Yes, and a risk assessment was carried out. It just wasn't documented.
A documented risk assessment could be shared with colleagues both within PHE and with the many other agencies involved in the response. Do you agree with that?
In theory, yes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take you to a risk assessment that we have. This is document INQ 005805. So this was a report prepared for the World Health Organization. So nothing to do with the, wasn't prepared for the purposes of the response to the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings. That's right, isn't it?
Indirectly, yes.
Indirectly, yes. Okay. So if we turn over to the risk assessment, on page 5, Dame Sally Davies' evidence was that these are reports that are made by the British focal point to the World Health Organization on international health regulations. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. The document isn't dated, but the contents certainly make it clear that it was written after the Amesbury incident had been thoroughly investigated. And here on page 5, we have a formal risk assessment. Is that right? Would you recognize that?
It's a summary of what the risks might be.
Okay. So it talks about the risks being potential contamination of the public transport system, contamination of the hotel room used by the suspects. Those first 2 points, of course, arise from the covert investigation. So certainly in the aftermath of the Salisbury poisonings, not something that PHE would have known about. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Any as yet undiscovered PPE or devices. Well, that's something PHE did know about because it's mentioned in the SRG minutes on the 9th of March. Then it says, given that, we are confident, following studies that have carefully mapped how contamination is spread from location to location, it's very clear that only small quantities of material are transferred from contact to contact, and that the levels rapidly reduce to non-harmful quantities. Material that has been released or transferred to locations known to have been visited by the suspects or their victims have already been identified and cleaned. And any materials that were released into the open environment will have been rapidly diluted, dispersed, or degraded, and are no longer a risk to the public. And then there's the assessment here that there's no risk to people who use or run any of the following public transport systems, and it lists trains and the underground. Second, we are confident from passive surveillance and the fact that the suspects have remained well that there will not have been any risk to people who stayed at the City Stay Hotel although some tracing was conducted. And finally, there is a residual risk of another item or contaminated materials associated with the first attack coming to light. And then if we turn over the page, we have risk mitigations. And those are a program of mapping and cleaning of all known routes of spread of contamination has been undertaken. And then we continue to give our advice, which has been extended since March 2018, that people should not, in public places, pick up anything that they do not recognize as something that they have dropped. And then the final risk mitigation is tracing for public reassurance guests who'd stayed at the City Stay Hotel. So here we have Public Health England, in fact, putting in place risk mitigations, or recording risk mitigations put in place for a discarded container. That's right, isn't it? That's the second risk mitigation. Would you agree with me about that?
Yes.
Yes. And they say that it's been extended since March 2018, but we actually can't, I'm sure you're aware, find a record of that advice being given in March of 2018.
I believe that's
Correct.
the situation.
Yes, I think in your statement you've said that you don't think it was given before, that advice wasn't given before the Amesbury poisonings.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, okay.
And I think it's probably worth noting this document was shared because it's a international notification of normally for infectious diseases, and it was primarily shared to notify WHO of the situation and update them, but also because the people who were contact traced who'd stayed in that hotel room subsequently, there were some people who were overseas visitors.
Yes,
That was the primary purpose of that document.
yes.
You
But
know
this-
where the proposition that this advice had been extant since March 2018 came from?
I don't know.
All right.
Okay. But this is a PHE documented risk assessment, and it records that a risk mitigation from the risk of any undiscovered PPE or devices would be giving this advice about not picking anything up which you haven't dropped yourself. It's based on that risk, which is a hypothetical risk, but it is still possible, isn't it, to put in place these risk mitigations even for hypothetical risks. Would you agree with me about that?
It needs to be considered, absolutely.
And there isn't any reason, is there, why this advice about not picking up anything that you don't recognize as being something you've dropped, there's no reason why that advice couldn't have been given in March of 2018, is there?
It could have been given if it was considered proportionate and that there was some evidence to support it. When public health advice is given, of course, it's only advice. People don't have to follow it. But however, our behavioural scientists and other people have been able to identify that there's a greater likelihood of people following advice if there is a rationale for it, and therefore when giving out public health advice, there's usually invariably a very good evidence base for that. You know, a good example, or perhaps not a good example, is if there's contamination in water and the water supply is cut off, there's very good evidence what that contamination is. It's repeatedly tested, and the mitigations are put in place. It's rectified, and then the supply is put back on again. So there's a very good evidence base for that advice.
I see. And so are you saying that it was felt by PHE that advice not to pick up a container is advice that wouldn't have been followed?
It's difficult to know, but advice needs to be proportionate and credible.
But PHE did issue advice about dry cleaning of clothes, for example. PHE issued advice about clothing worn by people who were in the mill and ZZs. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, because there was a possibility that there had been contamination of the clothing in those locations, because that was in an indoor location where the scribbles had been.
But this document itself confirms that there were only small quantities that could be transferred from one contact to another, and that levels rapidly reduced to non-harmful quantities. So that was, well, can I put it this way, a very cautious approach to take.
It was a cautious approach.
Okay. But it's one that PHE took anyway. It took that very cautious approach. And did the behavioral scientists have anything to say about issuing that very cautious advice?
I don't recall.
In your witness statement, I think we can turn to that now. It's INQ 006133, paragraph 38. You say a balance has to be struck when issuing public health advice to ensure that too much advice or extraneous advice does not distract from the key public health issues that are apparent at the relevant time. We received advice and support from behavioral scientists. PHE did issue extensive public health advice at the time, for example, around dry cleaning, and carried out extensive public engagement beyond the issuing of that advice. For example, provision of advice at meetings with the public, the physical presence of local and national public health leaders in Salisbury, and letters to local residents. And what I want to ask you about is the beginning of that paragraph 38. Are you recording there your reasons for not giving that if you didn't drop it, don't pick it up advice?
I think, as I've already said, advice needs to be ideally evidence-based and proportionate, and also what is the most important advice for people to follow at that time. And there was a lot of advice and a lot of community engagement with Salisbury. What any discarded Novichok could be, what container it might be in, whether it had been exposed to the atmosphere, it was not known. It was not known, so it would have been very difficult to issue public health advice on a supposition.
Well, that public health advice was given after the Amesbury attack, wasn't it? To
Yes.
people not to pick up anything they haven't dropped themselves.
And
We'll come to that in a moment, but it certainly was possible to give advice to mitigate that risk. Isn't that correct?
At that stage, a container had been identified, unfortunately.
Yes, but that advice wasn't directed towards that identified container because that had been taken away by the authorities, of course. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm going to take you now to an interview conducted with D84U. A record of that is INQ 004836. This was an interview that you weren't present at, but it was an interview conducted as part of a review process. And I'd just like to ask you about something that D84U says. So in their interview, they say the possibility was considered that other caches of the agent could be present, for example, in a discarded bottle. It was agreed to be ready for a surge medical response if more people became ill, but not to stoke panic by issuing public messages about this hypothetical scenario. An assumption was made that the assassin was acting professionally. Do you recall discussions about not stoking public panic as a reason for not giving that advice?
I think there were many discussions about proportionality of advice and an awareness that the population of Salisbury was understandably quite anxious, hence the considerable messaging and community engagement. But I wouldn't have used the word panic.
Okay, because what I was going to ask you is whether there was a basis from the behavioral scientists about the panic that could ensue if that advice was given?
I think these were the words of that Department of Health and Social Care official.
Okay, so stoking panic was not one of your reasons.
I don't think Public Health England would have framed it in those words.
Well, you've just said you'd have used the word anxiety rather than
Yes.
panic.
Dame Sally Davies' evidence was that she was very worried about someone, a child in particular, that would pick up some discarded container and be injured. Do you recall discussing that with her or anyone else at the time?
The majority of discussions between PHE and Dame Sally were either through Sir Paul Cosford or occasionally through Dr. Gent.
Okay.
I didn't have that much direct communication with her outside of the meetings we both attended.
And in those meetings you both attended, am I right in thinking you don't recall her expressing that thought?
I'm not aware of it, no.
Okay. For completeness now, I'm just going to take you to the public health advice issued following Amesbury. In fact, the first one we don't need to go to, but for the transcript reference, it's reference 1436, page 4. On the 4th of July, the message was given that the public should be careful, as always, of picking up any unknown or already dangerous objects, such as a needle or a syringe. And then on the 6th of July, and we can go to this, it's reference 4734, page 4. Oh, that's not right. Yes. Public health advice for schools and injecting drug users community is currently being worked on, particularly for those who have traveled to any of the sites in Salisbury. The usual routes are being used to ensure people get the information. Can you help us with this? Would this be something that the local public health officials, because you talked about local PHE as well as the national structures, who would be responsible for giving that advice to schools and injecting drug users?
So I think it would have been a collaborative agreement around what the messaging was, which would have been between PHE at a national level, PHE at a regional level, the local authority public health team, and with support from the various communications teams to ensure to get a consistent message, but actually to frame it in appropriate language for those different populations.
You've spoken about the need to give advice which is proportionate. Do you think that before the Amesbury poisonings, if it wasn't proportionate to give advice to the public not to pick up anything they hadn't dropped, that it might have been proportionate to give advice to specific groups, for example, schools or the intravenous drug user community?
I think the understanding of the attacks in March were that it was they were targeted. It was targeted and not accidental. I think with the very unfortunate incident at the end of June, which was accidental, that the whole circumstances changed and it was a different approach needed to be taken.
I don't think you've answered the question, you know.
Apologies.
try again.
Perhaps you could ask again so I can make sure that I answer the right question.
Well, the question was, in the pre-Amesbury period, if it was disproportionate to give general advice about don't pick up, might it have been a good idea, or rather, might it have been proportionate to deliver it to specific groups, schools or drug users?
And my understanding is that considerable communication across the whole community happened during the march, and which should have included, I think, did include all those groups, but with a different type of messaging, slightly different focus.
Not messaging that they shouldn't pick up anything they hadn't dropped themselves.
And not specifically with regard to this.
And finally, I'm just going to take you to the last documented advice given, and that's reference 5921, page 17. And it's an op-ed written by Professor Sir Paul Cosford. And in the third paragraph, it says, it's a little difficult to read, but as a result, I want to emphasize that there are some simple precautions which everyone should take. Nobody, adult or child, should pick up any foreign object which could contain liquid or gel.
And this is Sir Paul Cosford.
Sir Paul Cosford,
When?
an op-ed, pardon me, if we zoom out, yes, I don't think there's a date.
Salisbury Journal, so it's something for the local paper by the look of it, is it?
Yeah, I don't think this document
Well,
is
it's
dated.
post-Amesbury, look, you can see that from the first paragraph.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you very much. I don't have any further questions for you.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
indeed. Yes, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you, sir. V13A, my name is Jesse Nichols and I'm asking questions on behalf of Dawn Sturgess' family. Can I start by asking you some questions, please, about organisational and individual roles, and I'll be clear as I come on to them who I'm referring to. First, I want to confirm with you something you've said in your statement. It's the first sentence of paragraph 37, just so I'm clear. You say, PHE was responsible for issuing public health advice. Can you confirm that that is correct?
Public Health England was responsible for issuing public health advice. In the context of an incident response that was multi-agency, it would be working collaboratively across that multi-agency response, and particularly with whatever agency was leading the response. In this case, it was predominantly the police, so it was actually working collaboratively.
Can I take you to INQ 4715? These are the PHE SRG minutes for the 12th of March. Do you see from page 1 that you attended that meeting?
Yes.
Can we turn to page 2, please? Do you see a reference right at the top of the page to what are described as known government meetings for today?
Yes.
Do you see that? Thank you. And there's then a list of times. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you see at 10 o'clock there is a meeting described as national to local call, Home Office lead?
Yes.
And if you look further down, do you see that it says there will be other DH senior meetings later today? And then it says D8-4U was attending the 10 o'clock meeting.
Yes.
And D8-4U is a senior official within the Department of Health, yes?
Yes.
Now, do you know whether that call is about linking national and local responses to the incident?
It would have been around communication between national and local.
with the Home Office leading. Yes?
Yes.
Now, am I right in understanding from the minutes that we have that you knew and worked with D84U
Yes.
in a professional capacity?
Yes.
Was D84U someone capable of effectively relaying relevant information?
Yes.
Can I move down page 2, please, to about 2/3 of the way down the page? Thank you very much. Can you stop there, Bijal? That's perfect. Do you see right in the middle of the page now, there's a section called Information Sharing?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just going to read it out. Discussions are ongoing to develop a system that works for practical information exchange with the police. Yes? So between PHE and the police. Do you agree?
Yes.
It then goes on to say, I'm not going to read it all out. You are then referred to. Do you see it says you confirmed you had spoken with someone redacted regarding sharing information?
Yes.
Do you agree that appears to be about sharing information between PHE and the police?
Yes. But it doesn't say what information.
It doesn't, you're right. Does it then say that Mr. Gent and you will be the point of contact for information into PHE from the police?
Yes.
We can highlight the section if you need. You see the one I'm talking about?
I do.
NG/V13 will be point of contact. You see that?
Yes.
Thank you. About 6 lines up from the bottom of the same page, do we see another reference to you in which it says that you are also to speak to another person whose name is redacted regarding guidance on what can be said at what level?
Yes.
Does that engage the same topic that Ms. Pottle asked you about in relation to the ability to discuss information because of classification? Do you remember she asked you some questions about the ability to share information because of its sensitivity in one of the earlier minutes that she showed you? Do you remember that? And you were having meetings with people, you couldn't remember who they were, about being able to share information?
It was around what could or what could not be said. I don't know if it was the same information because this was the following week, so things may have moved on.
But it's about the fact of being able to share information in this context, isn't it?
It may have been around specific information.
Can we turn, please, to the 6th of March SRG minutes briefly? So I'm deliberately going back in time, and I'll explain why. It's because, you know this, I think, the minutes are extremely repetitive, aren't they? Because they contain the same actions that have then been completed and built upon. And the 12th of March minutes are a good starting point for lots of actions that have already taken place in the first week. But I need to go back to the 6th of March to show you one point. Do you understand?
Yes.
Thank you. Can I go back to INQ 4702, please? You were shown this by Ms. Pottle. I just want to look at one point. 4702. Do you recognise those minutes?
Yes.
Can we see page 2, please? Do you see that there's an entry 3 paragraphs down from the top that reads, you are setting up meetings to maximise any inflow of required information to support the public health management of the incident, which may be generally inaccessible due to appropriate security barriers to accessing the required information?
Yes.
And so, because of that role, does that lead into the description that you have 6 days later of being the point of contact into PHE from the police?
Not necessarily.
But of course, you were setting up those meetings and you were seeking to maximise the inflow of that information and you were named as the point of contact into PHE from the police, weren't you?
If police chose to use it.
Well, we'll come to that. Can we go back to the 12th of March minutes, please? So they're at 4715. And I'd like to look, please, Bijal, at page 8, if that's all right. Conscious there's a little jumping around. Do you see 2 entries down? And we haven't looked at too many of these with Ms Pottle because, of course, she's had to cover a vast number of minutes. But there's a table at the end of every set of the minutes that has this table that becomes longer and longer because many of the actions are completed in the right-hand column. Do you agree?
Yes.
And do you see 2 down? The action that was identified in the entry I just showed you from the 6th of March is one that you have successfully completed by the 12th of March. So you have completed holding meetings in the morning to minimise any security barriers to accessing the required information. Yes?
Yes.
And you've completed that by the date of this meeting, which is when you are then made the point of contact for information from the police into PHE. Do you see?
I don't recall the specifics of that earlier one, but I think that was slightly different.
How?
Which is, well, I don't recall the details, but I think it was slightly different. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a new action on the 12th.
The action was on the 6th, and the point I'm making is that by the 12th, you've completed it.
Yeah, I'm just saying that one was completed, and I'm saying the 12th was a new action.
I agree. Was the purpose of successfully completing those meetings and having you and Mr. Gent, Dr. Gent, as a point of contact to ensure that as much relevant information as possible was shared from the police to PHE so PHE could make informed and effective decisions about public health advice?
It was to facilitate the communication channels.
Was that a yes to the question I asked?
Yes, but probably not as general as you suggest.
Thank you, that's a helpful clarification. Can we stay on the 12th of March minutes, please? So still on 4715 and move to page 9, please. I explained at the start that I was exploring roles. First, I was exploring the role of PHE. Then I was exploring your role. I'd now like to go on to explore the role of D84U, who you worked closely with. Do you see, and I need to catch up, that by the 12th of March, I could take you to where it becomes first in action, but it's been completed, so we can just stay on this document. Do you see 4 down from the top? That D84U has completed the action of being the liaison between the CCS, let's just remember who that is, that's the Civil Contingency Secretariat, isn't it? They sit within the Cabinet Office, don't they?
Yes.
Do they sit within the National Security Secretariat in the Cabinet Office?
I think they're separate from the National Security Secretariat.
I think we've heard some evidence that they actually sit within the National Security Secretariat, but we can come on to that and deal with it in due course if we need to. If you don't know, then you can't give the evidence. But if I read out, does it agree there that the completed action is that D84U is going to be the liaison with the CCS and provide feedback from the CCS to the SRG?
That's the way the action is documented. I would expect it to pertain to a particular issue, however.
Well, isn't it likely, in fact, that it wouldn't pertain to a particular issue and instead it would be something that someone would act as a role because it would be important and effective to have one senior Department for Health official in central government acting as a liaison from central government with the CCS to PHE? Doesn't that make complete sense?
Yes.
Was the purpose, and of course I'm asking you these questions because you were at all these meetings at which these actions were created and then identified as completed, was the purpose of the arrangement for the CCS to share as much relevant information as possible with PHE via D84U to facilitate and allow PHE to determine appropriate and effective public health advice?
Potentially, yes, but I think there were other routes for the coordination of this incident response by that second week because of the way that the health emergency response cell had been established. And I think that was the main point of contact across government departments.
Well, thank you for that. I've been given a fairly limited time to ask my questions, and I'm afraid I'm not going to spend that time asking you about Herc, having seen the documents and how long that would take. So I understand the answer, but I'm going to now move on to another topic. The next final question I'd like to ask you about is, did you work closely with D84U as well as Nick Gent, including by attending SAGE meetings together on the 12th of March and the 16th of March?
We all attended those meetings, yes.
Thank you. In your statement, and I can take you to it on the screen if you need me to, you say two things which I would like to ask for your confirmation of in relation to the risk posed by discarded Novichok. First, at paragraph 33 on page 9, you say the risk of residual material was known and documented by PHE. And at page 35 on page 10, you say, and of course I'm reading from 6133, but I think everyone has it in front of them, you say, quote, the general possibility of discarded materials had been considered by PHE and could not be ruled out. You go on to say in the same paragraph, there was a potential risk. Do you agree with your own statement?
If that's what my statement says, yes.
It does, and thank you. Next topic, please. You have described on a number of occasions the risk of discarded Novichok following the Skripal poisoning as hypothetical or, on occasions, theoretical. I would like to ask you some questions briefly about that. In the circumstances that pertained after the Skripal poisoning, you, and by that I mean PHE, but also you, knew that a nerve agent, and you subsequently learnt at least by the 13th of March, when we see the document Ms. Fottle took you to, you knew that nerve agent and subsequently Novichok had been applied in Salisbury to the door handle of the Skripal house, didn't you?
Yes.
You learnt about the door handle a little later, but you knew it had been applied, yes?
Yes.
Do you agree you, therefore, must have known that it had been applied in some way?
Well, it had been applied in some way, yes.
Otherwise it couldn't have got there. Is that obvious, isn't it? You agree?
Yes, it was applied in some way.
Do you also agree that the mechanism by which it was applied, which at that time was unknown, had not been found?
It had not been identified to our knowledge, yes.
And it hadn't been found, as far as you were aware?
Yes.
I suppose the point you'd make is someone might have found it, and that would be a fair point. But as far as you were aware, it had not been found, yes?
Yes.
And on the 9th of March, PHE had, in their own minutes at the SRG, considered the possibility of unidentified containers of the nerve agent. Do you agree?
Yes, PHE had considered it.
Now, do you have to accept, in light of those matters, that it is wrong to describe the risk of discarded Novichok as hypothetical or speculative or theoretical?
No, because we didn't know if we didn't know how it was applied. We didn't know what had happened to whatever the applicator was, whether it had been disposed of, whether it had been removed from the country or anything.
I didn't say it was a probability, but at least it would be a realistic possibility. It must have been, given the four factors I just went through, that PHE themselves had recognised. Mustn't it?
It was something to consider.
Well, the chair has my question and he has your answer. I don't imagine he'll benefit from me asking it again, which I've done before and I won't do now. Next topic, proportionality. I think you've used the word proportionality 6 times during your evidence. I may have that wrong. And the reason I want to ask you about that is because of the way in which you've used that concept each time you talk about risk assessment. Now, you seem to indicate that proportionality is a key principle in deciding what, if any, action to take to seek to prevent a risk from materialising. Have I understood you correctly?
It's one of the things that would be considered.
And do you mean by proportionality that when you assess what, if any, protective steps to take to guard against a risk, you have to assess the risk of taking the step with the harm of not taking the step?
Yes.
Your evidence was that the risk, as I understood it, of issuing the advice that Ms. Pottle was asking you about was to cause anxiety to members of the public. Do you agree? That was your evidence.
It was a potential risk, and I think one needs to put that in the context of the number of other risk mitigations that had been put into place across Salisbury at that time,
Well,
which were considerable.
They were, and I could go through why I would suggest to you they don't address the risk from a discarded container of Novichok. I think it would be obvious why, but I don't have the time to do that. So can I come back to my question, which is, you've said that the risk of issuing the advice is anxiety. Do you agree that the harm caused by not issuing the advice is that one or more people may die?
No, because it is only advice and it does not mean that people will follow it.
And that's why it's a risk, isn't it? The risk of not issuing the advice is that people may die. Not that they will die, but that they may die.
No, because it is only advice.
Yes, but it's advice that you would issue carefully with the expectation that people would follow it, which is why it was issued presumably in July, as Ms. Pottle has asked you about on a number of occasions. And so, at the least, it's seeking to guard against the risk that someone will pick up the bottle and die.
I think one could discuss this in detail, but there are always risks of actions.
I'd like to move forward to a small number of the documents you've been shown and ask discrete, different questions to the ones you've been asked. First document I'd like to go to, and we may not need to look at it, can we have it please, Bijal, is 4837. This is the 9th of March SRG minutes that you've seen. I do apologise, I brought up the wrong reference. I should be showing you, this is the SAGE meeting, I do apologise, on the 9th of March.
And is that the one you want?
It is, and I'll come to the SRG after that, to take it
So
slightly back.
4837.
That's correct.
Right.
Thank you. Can we look at page 3? Please. Remembering, could we scroll down please to the bottom, Bijal? Remembering the role that D84U had been assigned and completed, do you see that D84U attends that SAGE meeting?
Yes.
Ms. Pottle, I'm going to summarise because it would take time otherwise, has summarised to you what was discussed in relation to the risk of discarded Novichok in this SAGE meeting. And I just need to add one point to it. She told you what Dame Sally Davis said about it. Sir John Aston on Monday this week indicated that in this meeting, SAGE was considering the possibility of a discarded container of Novichok as well as other forms of discarded Novichok material. Do you understand?
Yes.
Did D84U relay that information to the SRG?
Not that I'm aware of.
Certainly there's no record of that in any of the SRG minutes, is there?
No.
I don't think I need to take you to the minutes of the 9th of March SRG, but I'd like to ask you about something you said about them. Now, you'll remember the context. The 9th of March minutes are the ones that Ms Pottle spent perhaps the most time on because they contain PHE identifying the risk from an unidentified container. Do you remember?
It's PHE considering a risk.
And you said this, quote, "There needs to be further work to actually identify whether there is evidence to support that consideration to actually inform any public health actions going forward." Now, I am not aware from your witness statement or from the disclosure that PHE took any further actions after the 9th of March on this point. That is to say, to actually identify whether there's evidence to support the consideration to actually inform public health actions going forward. Did they?
I don't think I can go into that level of detail in this location.
Next topic, please. Dame Sally Davis's concerns about a discarded container of Novichok. So John Aston said in evidence that, in effect, he was sure that Dame Sally had expressed her concern about a discarded container of the nerve agent and someone picking it up on one of two dates: Sage on the 9th of March or Sage on the 16th of March. D84U was at both meetings. Was that information from Dame Sally relayed to the SRG?
Not that I'm aware of,
And there's no record to that effect, is there?
no.
Could I ask you to please look at your witness statement, page 4, paragraph 12. And Bijan, maybe we can have it on screen. It's 6133. Thank you. Do you have it, B13A?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just going to read the relevant paragraph. I'm looking at paragraph 12, if I can, please, Bijan, on page 4. Thank you. While I'm unable to be sure of the exact date, the letter of Dr. Gent, dated the 16th of July, so this is the after Amesbury letter that you've referred to a number of occasions, referred to a briefing to the head of CT policing for the area early on in the investigation, at which I was present. This included a briefing on a reasonably foreseeable worst-case scenario, including the risk of residual materials and so on. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can I ask, please, to turn up that letter? It's 6178. We look at the passage in the middle that says, "at the beginning of this incident." Thank you very much, Bizal. Do you see it says, B13A, as I understand it, you are at this meeting at which
Yes.
this is said, yes. At the beginning of this incident, I, that's Dr. Gent, formulated a reasonable, foreseeable, worst-case scenario of, and I'm going to look at 3, that it was foreseeable that residual materials discarded by the perpetrators could be discovered and cause acute clinical harm to those persons finding them. Is that another example that PHE, at the time, early on in the investigation, were aware of exactly the risk that Ms Pottle and myself have been asking you about?
It was a potential occurrence, yes.
I'm next going to move on, please, to the reasonable worst-case scenario document, and everyone will be pleased to hear that I'm not going to do a reasonable worst-case scenario analysis of it. I'm going to ask you about one point as it relates, please, to the SRG minutes from the 8th of March. Now, can I have 4872, please, Bijal? I don't need to take you to the 4704 document because I think we've all seen it many, many times. But this 8th of March meeting is where the action is crystallised that this document will be produced, and you're nodding your head, yes? Can we look at page 3, about halfway down the page, please, Bijal? Do you see the number 2? under PHE to produce. Do you see that, V13A?
Yes.
Just give me one moment. Do you agree that it says that you will link in and that you are identified as one of the owners of the action in the right-hand column?
Yes.
So when you said earlier to the chair that you would have expected them to contact you and they never did you omit to mention that you were tasked with linking in and being responsible for that action?
No, but in relation to the email chain with Department of Health and Social Care, which said that they would link back to us for when they wanted our input.
You've got the chronology the wrong way round, V13A. This was after the email chain. The email chain happened in the evening of the 7th and the early morning around 8 a.m. of the 8th. This meeting takes place after that, as we saw from Jenny Harry's email, which says, I'll send you the link to the 9 o'clock and I'll see you on the call. This is that call. This is the action that flows from that call. And you are tasked at the end with linking in and taking responsibility for that action. Did you fail to link in as you were made responsible for?
I don't recall.
Well, I think your evidence was that you never saw the reasonable worst case scenario document or had anything to do with it. So it must follow, mustn't it, that you didn't do that?
That's what it would appear, but I do not, I don't know the circumstances around it.
Can I bring up another document, please, Bijal? I'm moving forward to 4836. This now is the June debrief with D84U that Ms. Pottle took you to.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go back over the caches point. We have the caches point. You'll recall that the SRG had identified that D84U's role, that is a real mouthful, let me try that again, D84U's role was to liaise with the CCS and feed back to the SRG. Yes? That was the role that was assigned to D84U. Now, you know, and I'm asking about the section that says the possibility was considered that other caches of the agent could be present, for example, in a discarded bottle. Now, if that discussion did not take place at the SRG, I'm not going to pursue that avenue. That's a matter for the chair. He's heard Ms. Pottle's questions about that. If it didn't happen at the SRG, did D84U feed back to the SRG that the possibility had been considered that other caches of the agent could be present, for example, in a discarded bottle?
Not that I'm aware of, and I don't recall offhand how frequently that individual themselves attended the SRG, or whether it was other colleagues who attended either. But as I've already said, I think that cross-government communication increasingly happened through the HERC.
Yes, well, if it happened through the HERC, based on your evidence, I understand you to be saying that that didn't come back to you through HERC either. Or is it your evidence that that was passed back to you through HERC?
Not that I don't recall.
Yes. And there's no record, is it, of it coming to the SRG either through HERC or through D84U as a liaison with the CCS? Do you agree?
I don't think if it was considered at HERC, it would necessarily be noted at SRG, because it was a slightly different approach.
I only asked you about it because it was the example you gave as the process that was supplanting the one I've been asking you about. But we'll move on. Can I look at Dame Sally Davis' witness statement, please? 6138. And I'm nearly finished. I'd like to look at page 8, paragraph 35, please, Bija. Thank you very much. Have you seen this before, V13A?
Yes,
Thank
I've
you.
read it since in the last week or so.
Thank you. Am I okay not to read it out, but instead to ask you questions about it? And if you need to read sections, you can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dame Sally is expressing a concern about disposal of residual nerve agent, and she confirmed in her oral evidence that she considered that to be a serious risk. Now, she says, does she not, in this statement, that she was reassured that the police were hunting for a discarded vial. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you understand a vial to be a container of liquid?
Yes.
Does that indicate that she was reassured, and she puts this dated in March 2018, that that's what was being looked for? A small container of liquid?
Yes.
Do you agree that that's very similar to D84U's account in the debrief before Amesbury took place? It is, isn't it?
Yes.
Does that suggest that at the time it was known that the concern was they were looking for a small vial or bottle of liquid?
That was a balance of probabilities of what something like that might have been contained in.
And that was known at the time, wasn't it?
It wasn't known.
It was known that that was the balance of probability.
It was possible.
Well, I think you said balance of probabilities, and I'll take that. So if I move on, please, to, I think, the penultimate topic.
Pardon me, hesitate to interrupt, but the stenographer has been going now for nearly an hour and a half.
So sorry.
We are over the time allocated to the family
Well,
test
let me
questions.
inquire, Miss Bottle, because first of all, Mr. Nichols, how much longer have you got?
3 minutes.
How many?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. We'll manage.
Thank you very much. You've indicated in your statement and your evidence that the do not pick it up advice was not issued until July. Yes?
That's my understanding.
And your evidence in your statement, and repeated today in all evidence, is that when it was issued in July, it was a proportionate way to reassure the public. I can take you to the reference if you'd like.
Yes.
It's in your statement. It's paragraph 34, page 10. Do you accept that, given the balance of probabilities you just described about what the container might be, the fact that it was known that it contained a lethal nerve agent, if it existed, and that in your evidence, the risk of issuing such advice pre the 30th of June was anxiety, the only proportionate decision would be to issue the advice?
I'm afraid that's rather picking out little bits of her evidence, Mr. Nichols. I've got the point, but it's...
I'm sorry if you think that's an unfair question. I feel that that's an accurate reflection of what the witness has
well,
accepted.
it's bits of it, yes.
Maybe I'll frame it this way. In the circumstances I've taken you through, you can understand that as you wish. Do you accept that prior to the 30th of June, the only proportionate outcome would be to issue the advice, do not pick up unidentified items that you did not drop yourself?
I don't think there was any evidence to support that.
I've no
Thank
further
you very
questions.
much indeed, Mr. Nichols. I'm grateful. Wait a minute. Have you got some questions?
Sir, Alistair Henderson on behalf of His Majesty.
Yes, I know, Mr. Henderson.
I was going to ask your permission, sir, just to ask questions about one point to tidy up the chronology, but I'm very conscious of what was
Well,
said.
I think we'd probably better break.
Of course.
Have we got more evidence this afternoon, Miss Pottle?
Yes, we do have more evidence this afternoon, and we will need, I'm afraid, to break between this witness and the next.
Oh, well, in that case, can you bear it? I think we'd better have Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, sir. I will be very brief, and thank you to the stenographer in particular. V13A, I just want to ask a couple of questions. There's been a lot of questions put to you about this reasonable worst-case scenario document produced by the Department for Health, and I would just like to try and clarify the chronology with you, if I may. I think there's no need to bring up these documents because we've all seen them multiple times on the screen. So we've seen that the reasonable worst case scenario document produced by the Department of Health was dated the 15th of March 2018. It's right, isn't it, that you describe at a very early stage in the investigation having the conversation, in fact it was Dr. Gent and you were present, having the conversation with the head of CTP where you discussed the possibility of a discarded material. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you describe it simply as early on in the investigation, but you can't remember the exact date. Can you recall roughly when it was? Was it, for example, within the first week after you were informed or some other time?
I've tried to seek my records as to when it was because it would have required specific travel for that meeting to occur, and it would not have occurred before at least the 16th of March.
So it's after that time?
Yes.
In any event, though, we know that the SRG minutes on the 9th of March, and again, we've seen them, contain reference to a discussion about potential discarded material. Do you agree?
Yes.
So it seems that at least 6 days before the Department of Health produced that reasonable worst case scenario document, there had been a discussion in PHE about precisely that risk, that possibility.
There had been a discussion about the possibility of it, and as I've previously indicated, it's a consideration, and many things are considered. It doesn't mean they're acted on.
So just to tidy off that chronology, it was clear from what you said earlier that you did not see that Department of Health document, and you don't think anyone else at PHE saw it at the time. Had you seen it, would it have added any more information to your consideration of the possibility of discarded material than was already being considered?
It would have. It could have further informed some of the communication actions and development of some of the other risk mitigations. And I think that a number of those, many of those were already in place.
Right. Would it have been an entirely new piece of information, though?
It was something to think about. There was no evidence to actually inform it. It was a potential worst case scenario.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. No further questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Just a moment, please, Waddle. I don't want to prolong this. You've been there for a very long time, but I'm left in uncertain what I ought to be writing down. I'm on the question of not the risk of discarded material being lurking somewhere. You've dealt with that. I'm on the specific question of either giving or not giving. Don't pick up advice after March, but before the end of June. All right?
Yes.
Now then, I think there are probably 2 or 3 possibilities. One is that it was considered but rejected for reasons which seemed good at the time. Another is that it wasn't considered at all. And a third is that you don't know which. What should I be writing down, please?
The Public Health England response to the incident stood down during April, and we were not advised further about the police ongoing search.
In that case, refine the question to March. Was it considered, was the possibility of giving such don't pick up advice considered and decided against, or was it not considered at all?
I believe it was considered and decided against.
Right, thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
Yes. Thank you, sir. If we could take a break now, the next witness to give evidence is Adam Wilson, and that will be in level 1.
Yes. Well, you better have a little longer than usual. 10-2, please. Yes, Mr. Whitelaw.
Good afternoon, sir. We were going to, this afternoon, adduce the written evidence of Joseph Vivas, the Puig Operations Vice President. But in fact, we're not now going to deal with that today, and we will deal with that next week. So we have the witness today, Adam Wilson, if he could be sworn, please.
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Do sit down because the microphones will pick you up better there, and the questions will come from over there.
Mr. Wilson, thank you for your patience today and waiting to give evidence. As you know, my name is Francesca Whitelaw, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. I think you have in front of you a hard copy of your witness statement you've made for the inquiry of 3 pages. Could we bring up the first page on the screen, please? It's INQ 004503. Is that your statement dated the 24th of January 2020?
It is.
And have you had an opportunity to read through that statement before giving evidence?
I have.
And could you confirm that the contents are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. So if we could adduce the statement
Yes,
in the usual way.
adduce it, please. It's there for you to use if you need it, but what matters is what you tell me. You're not bound by it, but you can refresh your memory from it if you need to. Right.
It says under occupation of your statement, you're a forensic scientist. Could you tell us what your role was at the time of making your statement?
So at the time of making my statement, I was employed by Cellmark Forensic Services and still am to this date. My role is a forensic scientist, and my area of expertise is in marks, which includes the examination of heat seals.
Right.
And for how long had you been in that position?
My role at Cellmark, I've been in that position since 2009.
And what are your qualifications, please?
I have a BSc Honours degree in Materials Science.
Could you tell us what information was provided to you in order for you to make your witness statement? And do refer to your statement if you need to do so.
So by the investigating police force, I was provided with two DVDs of images of 2 plastic sachets which had been recovered as part of the investigation.
And when you say the investigating police force, is that Counter-Terrorism Policing South East?
That's correct.
So you worked from DVDs, did you?
Yes.
And were you also provided with some notes that indicated the dimensions of items recovered?
I was, yes.
And upon what were you asked to comment?
So the purpose of my examination was all based on the provided images, and I've been asked to comment on any similarities between the 2 sachets in terms of manufacturing features, such as the heat seals, and I was also asked whether either the sachets could have contained the components which I understand to be the bottle in question.
So to clarify, you looked only at photographs, is that correct?
Yes, my examinations have been limited to only photographs.
Well, there may have been good reason for that.
Yes.
Yes.
Indeed. And if we could, you refer in your statement to a reference, but it's a different reference from the inquiry reference. So you refer to VN 551/10, and those photographs I'll bring up on screen, please. First of all, INQ 004563. Could you confirm whether that's one of the photographs you saw of the bottle?
Yes.
So we see their bottle and applicator in a Petri dish. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. And then if we could look at the next one, which is again forms part of VN 55110, the bottle on its own upright. Did you also see that?
Yes.
And next, INQ 005077. I don't know if we can make, yes, thank you, a bit larger. Again, the bottle, but this time on its side. Did you see that photograph?
I have, yes.
And finally, INQ 005079. If we could possibly make that larger and turn it on its side if we can. We've got 3 Petri dishes there containing the nozzle applicator and the bottle upright. Did you also see that photograph?
I have, yes.
So what have we got there? We've got bottle on applicator in the middle, bottle on the left.
It's the bottles on the right, and I'm
What's
not
on
sure
the
if it's the reflection, because that looks like the nozzle. I don't know whether you're able to.
My understanding is that on the right of that image is the bottle in question.
Yep.
In the centre is what has been referred to as the applicator.
Yep.
And then on the left, my understanding is that that's the pump nozzle, but my understanding is that that has been placed in another container at the lab.
In some other
Yes,
neck.
yes.
Got it.
Thank you very much. First of all, then, you indicated that you reviewed some DVDs. Did you review a DVD containing 122 images of a clear plastic sachet?
Yes.
I'm not going to take you to all of those images, but I will take you to a few. So first of all, INQ 006122, and this is what you refer to in your statement as one of the photographs at VN 511/49. So page 1 of this, please. Can you tell us what that bag you understood to be?
My understanding is that that is the exhibit bag of one of the sachets.
Thank you.
Is what we're looking at, as it were, the material you're examining, or is it a forensic bag that it's in?
It's the latter. That's the exhibit bag that it's contained within, yes.
Could we jump forward to page 7 of this document, INQ 006122? Is that the first plastic sachet that you were asked to comment upon?
It is.
And can you help us with the measurements of that? What size did you understand that sachet to be?
So the information I was provided with was that the sachet was approximately 90 millimetres in length.
90 mil.
Yes. And 44 millimetres in width.
If we could go to INQ 005073, you said you were provided with some notes of measurements. Do you recall if you saw this note?
I have been provided with that note, yes.
Was that the one you meant when you said?
Yes.
Thank you. So does that give us an indication there? You said 90 millimetres approximately by 44. I think we can see that at the top.
Yes.
And then we see both in this diagram, but perhaps if we can go back to INQ 006122 and page 7. Can you tell us about what appears to be a border around that sachet?
So from the edges in of that sachet, you'll see there's a brown stain that sort of stops just before the edge of the sachet. The area between this brown stain and the actual edge of the sachet is what I understand to be the heat-sealed area.
So it's a bag, is it, basically?
Yes. The outer edge is sealed all the way around.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Between the brown edge, the brown the way the brown line and the side of the bag, is it, as it were, solid?
Yes, that's the seal.
And looking at the left side of that photograph as we're looking at it, does it look as though the sachet's been cut open below the heat seal?
That's correct, yes.
We'll go to another image of this. It's page 117 of this same document, INQ 006122. Does that show a closer view of the same thing?
Yes.
And what can you tell us, if anything, about that cut?
Obviously, this is limited to the photograph only and not being viewed through a high-power microscope, but it has the appearance of being cut.
It looks unevenly.
Yes.
Can you just go back to the previous photograph, Ms. Whitelaw, for me,
That was page 7 of the same document, thank you.
so that I can spot where this is on it? Yes, where is it?
So the left-hand side
Top
of the
left.
photograph.
The lower left.
Lower left?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Right. Thank you very much. Just as what I asked.
From the examination you undertook, was it possible to determine whether or not the end of the sachet, which has been cut there, was sealed in the same action as the other edges?
I've not been able to confirm that.
We see the sachet appears to be discoloured or contain discolouring of liquid that's been described by other witnesses as being the result of liquid in the rubbish bin, potentially in which the sachet was found. Was there anything about the sachet which helped you assess what it may have contained?
No.
So no markings, to be clear, that helped you with that?
Yes, there's no further markings that I've seen on that sachet to give an indication of what it may have contained.
That was the first wrapper. In terms, if I may refer to it as that, or sachet. Secondly, did you examine a further DVD of 69 digital image of a second sachet?
I did.
And again, I won't take you to all of those images, but if we could go to INQ 006123 and page 3. Do you recognise that as a picture of the second sachet?
That's correct, it is.
And can you help us with the size of that, and do refer to your statement if you need to?
So the information I was provided with in this particular one was that the length of the sachet was 85 millimetres and approximately the width of 34 millimetres.
So smaller than the first one.
Yes.
If we could go now, please, to INQ 005074. Do you recall seeing these notes?
I do.
So did they also help you with the measurements?
They did, yes.
And these are of the second session?
Yes.
If we could go back to page 3 of INQ 006123. What can you tell us about the sealing of this sachet?
So this particular sachet had a different style seal to the first one that's been mentioned. The bottom edge, as I'm referring to it, which is the edge on the right-hand side of the image, was continuous in that the upper part of the sachet just looped all the way round to the lower part, as you see it there. That is not a seal, it's a continuous piece of plastic. Probably the best way to is that the right-hand side of the image, the seal is like that and then flattened down, folded. It's a continuous piece.
And what about the sides?
The sides appear to have been sealed and cut in the same operation.
Sealed and cut?
Yes,
That's the long sides, is it?
that's the long sides, yes.
Right.
So I'll go to another picture in case it helps you explain more about the heat sealing here. It's page 11 of the same document, INQ 006123.
So this image, the end that we are looking at there, I'm referring to that as the original opening.
In the photograph that we were looking at before,
Yes,
where the short edges were right and left,
yes, this will be the left-hand side. Yes.
Were you able to determine how many heat seals there were on the sachet, on this sachet?
So at that particular end, there is a seal across, which is sealing the sachet, and then there is a further seal which goes from the bottom edge on that image further into the sachet in a vertical action.
So 2 textured heat seals.
That's correct.
so one all the way across?
One all the way across, which will have sealed the sachet, and then a further seal roughly in the middle.
You can roughly make it out, at least perhaps I'm imagining it, down the middle.
Yes.
And does it go all the way down?
It goes, could we go back to the dimensions previously?
Yes, we can. The notes did you want, or did you want the...
I think there's, the notes, yes.
So the notes were INQ 005074.
So that seal went part way down the sachet.
About a third, quarter to a third of the way down, by the
Yes,
look.
yeah.
Can you help us with the size of the heat seals?
The width of those heat seals is approximately 1.5 millimetres.
Was the appearance of those usual or in any way unexpected?
In terms of the one going across, it's what I'd expect to be there in terms of sealing a particular bag.
Which one do you mean by across? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So that's the one as we see it there, which is in the vertical.
So the heat seal edge.
Yes.
That was as you'd expect. And what about the other one?
Yes. The other one served no purpose of sealing that sachet.
So does that mean you're able to say whether either of those seals were sealed at manufacture or post-manufacture?
In my opinion, they would be post-manufacture.
Both of them.
Yes.
And is that just from appearance or size or any other factor that you have that opinion?
That's based on the appearance and also the texture as well. I think there's another image that is available.
Yes, if we could go to that, please. So the other image you refer to, I think, is INQ 006123, and it's page 49. And you may need to explain this photograph to us.
So the image that's on the screen there is it's a grey silicone rubber cast that this material had been applied to the surface of the sachet. It's allowed to cure and set, and then upon peeling away from the sachet, you can see that texture detail has been recorded by that cast. Now, in terms of that texture detail that I'm referring to, on the lower section of the cast, and if we go to the ruler on the right-hand side, approximately on the 17 to 18 points, just so 2 millimetre below the 2. Going across, you'll see that there's a textured pattern going across the cast there.
Where the arrow is just pointing now. Is that right? Where?
Yes.
Almost like an impression of elastic.
Yes.
Yes. So what does that tell us?
So, in my opinion, that sort of seal is what I'd expect to be applied by an implement such as one of these sealing devices that are used in catering that you may have in your kitchen, for instance. where you do your vacuum pack, and they usually have this style of heat seal appearance.
I'm going to come to heat seals in a moment. Just to take you back two things. First of all, so this silicon cast, do you understand that to have been a scientific process that was applied at the same time as the photographs were taken?
Yes.
And do you know who took these photographs that were provided for you?
I don't have that precise information.
But they were provided to you by the police?
Yes.
Secondly, taking you back to what you said before about the two heat seals, one being the one you expect and the other one not having the purpose of sealing, what was the purpose, are you able to say, of the unexpected heat seal?
So if just to recap on those seals, the one which is sealing the sachet appears to be the one that has been applied first. The second one...
So that's what I've been calling the end.
The end, yes.
Which is, yes, the end one first.
And then the second seal, which is the one which was travelling part into the sachet,
Yep.
appears to have been applied afterwards.
And you say in your statement, for the purpose of holding the contents within a particular position, is that your assessment?
Yes.
Coming then to heat sealers, you refer to the sort of device that one might have in catering or in a kitchen for vacuum sealing things. We've heard evidence that people can buy small portable heat sealers on the open market, if I can put it like that. Is that your experience?
I'm aware of those sealers, yes.
Are you able to tell us anything about what they look like, what they cost, how easily?
On those particular sealers, it can vary between, I presume, manufacturers. I'm not fully aware of what texture they will always create.
Are you able to say how long it would take to seal the sort of plastic wrappers that you've seen in these photographs?
Usually it's within seconds.
If we could go now then, please, to the graphics pack INQ 005819 and page 115. Thank you. On the left of that photograph, did you see a photograph like that with the bottle, the applicator fitted and a collar on it?
The left-hand side photo, yes.
Yes, thank you. And we've already seen in your evidence the other photos of the bottle in its component parts. So are you able to say, first of all, whether sachet 1, the first one, the larger one, what it could have contained in terms of the bottle or its component parts, whether together or in different parts?
So in regards to sachet 1, the size of that sachet, in my opinion, is capable of containing all three of those components individually.
Individually? Or you don't mean all together?
No.
So are you saying that you don't think it was big enough to have contained it in its fitted together format as we see on the photograph there?
No.
Thank you. And what about sachet 2, the smaller sachet then?
So sachet 2, in my opinion, it wasn't capable of containing the bottle and the lid, or the bottle and the nozzle as one. So in my opinion, based on the information that I have, the bottle itself, along with those components together, could be excluded from being held within the second chassis.
The terminology there is...
Sorry.
No, it's not your fault, Mr. Wilson. I expect it's ours. Bottle is easy.
Yes.
Nozzle?
I think we've probably referred to that as the applicator previously.
What's shown in position here horizontally?
Yes.
Wrong, yeah. And lid?
That isn't shown within that image.
I can take you to another photograph, just to clarify whether or not this is what you mean. If we could go to INQ 005529, page 7. this is in fact a cap, which I don't know whether or not you've seen. The bottom right, do you see that small cap there?
Yes.
Did you see a photograph of that?
Yes.
And is that what you meant by lid or not?
I think I've only, just to clarify that, I think I've only been provided with a diagram of that lid and the measurements.
So when you said that sachet 2 could not take the bottle and the lid, or for that matter, the bottle and the nozzle,
Yes.
which were you meaning by lid? This thing,
Yes.
not the collar that holds the pump?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Could we go to INQ 004503, page 3? This is your statement, and I'd just like you, if you would please, just to take us through your conclusions.
So, in my opinion, the two sachets have a different construction style from each other. From the provided images, there's no markings, I believe, to be present, which could determine. Sorry, I'm going on to something else now. From the provided images, no markings have been found to assist in determining whether they have originally formed the same manufacturing source. So, i.e., there's nothing there to suggest that they relate to each other in terms of a manufacturing source.
Right.
Do you want to continue there with your conclusions?
In my opinion, the two heat seals have been applied to the second sachet post-manufacture by a heat sealing device which produces a singled textured heat seal.
And that's sachet 2, is it?
Yes,
One with 2.
yes.
Thank you. Do continue.
In my opinion, the findings do not assist in addressing whether or not the edges of the first sachet have been sealed in one operation. In my opinion, the dimensions of the first sachet is sufficient to have contained the bottle fitted with the lid. In my opinion, these components could not have been contained within the second sachet. In my opinion, the nozzle and the pump components would fit in either of the two sachets separately. However, based on the photographic material available, I'm unable to assist in determining whether or not they could have been contained together in either of the sachets.
So you can't tell from the photographs whether if, as you suggest, the sachet 1 could have taken the bottle and the lid. We don't know whether sachet 2 will take both the nozzle and the pump.
Yes.
I see. But it might do, might it?
As I say, from the material I've
Just can't
provided,
tell.
I can't tell.
All right.
So those are my questions for this witness, but I think there are a couple more.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just before you do, Mr. Straw, you mentioned the heat sealers, and you said people sometimes have them in their kitchens for stuff that's going in the freezer, I suppose, all that sort of thing. What sort of size can you get them?
Those particular ones that are available for kitchen use are probably approximately 30 centimetres in length.
So that's a foot.
However, I understand that more portable ones of a smaller size are available.
Do you know how much smaller?
Not to a precise size. I only know that they are of a smaller size than the usual kitchen ones that can be encountered.
Kitchen sealers may be about 30 centimetres, but there are smaller portable ones. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wilson, I asked questions on behalf of the family. Just two issues. The sealers, you were asked how long it takes to seal, and I think your answer was within seconds. Now, in order to use the sealer, does it take time to prepare it, for example, to warm it up or anything like that?
Yes, I'm familiar that some of them do have a preheating function first.
Can you give any idea of how long the whole process takes from when you get it out of your pocket, turn it on, seal it, and finish the process? Any idea of that?
From my experience, it would be less than a minute.
Thank you. And second question, could we have on screen, please, INQ 004563? Could you zoom in, please, to that? Thanks. On the left, you can see the bottle with the collar on it. Did that fit into the larger package?
Individually, yes.
And together?
Sorry, Mr. Straw, what do you mean together? Bottle and collar or bottle and applicator?
Sorry, so the bottle with the collar attached to it, as we can see on the left there of the photo, did that fit into the larger?
My understanding from the dimensions given, that as it is photoed there would not fit in sachet 1, the larger sachet.
And when you say your understanding, was that a certain conclusion, or was it something you weren't sure about, given what you were working with?
That opinion has been based on, obviously, the dimensions and the photographs that I've been provided with and limited to.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
So that
Nobody else?
Concludes the evidence for today, I believe.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Wilson. That's interesting. That's all. There's no need to stay unless, of course, you want to, nor any need to come back again unless you want to.
Okay, thank you.
Now then, where do we go next? Monday?
Monday morning, 10 o'clock, I believe level 1, but I'm just looking behind me to see if
Let me
there's
have a
any
look.
other indications. We'll confirm that with you, sir.
Looks likely, but please confirm. Okay, Monday morning, please, everybody, 10 o'clock. Probably level 1, but there may be an alteration.